Welcome to Compact Mysteries from CompactHistories.com, the show where we try to unravel a different bite-sized mystery each week, from baffling disappearances and strange objects to unexplained events and mysterious places. This is episode 78, The Mystery of the Tomb of Genghis Khan. In August 1227, Genghis Khan died while campaigning against the Western Xia, an empire in northwestern China that had resisted Mongol domination. By then, he was no longer simply Temujin, the ambitious steppe leader who had fought his way through tribal rivalries. He was Genghis Khan, the founder of the Mongol Empire, a ruler whose armies had reshaped Asia through speed, discipline, terror, and astonishing political organization. The exact circumstances of his death remain uncertain, which is fitting for a man whose final resting place would become one of history's great mysteries. Some accounts suggest he died after falling from a horse. Others hint at wounds, illness, or complications suffered during campaign. Later stories grew more dramatic because history has a habit of becoming theatre when nobody can find the paperwork. What matters most is what happened next. Genghis Khan's body was reportedly taken back towards Mongolia, away from the battlefield and into the landscapes that had shaped him. The journey itself must have been extraordinary. Here was the dead ruler of the largest land empire then in existence, carried across vast distances by followers who understood that his burial was not merely a family matter, it was political, spiritual, and dynastic. For the Mongols, death did not require monumental stone architecture in the same way it did for some settled civilizations. They did not need pyramids, grand mausoleums, or carved statues announcing, "Important dead person inside, please form an orderly queue." The steppe had its own sacred geography. Mountains, rivers, sky, and ancestral lands mattered deeply, especially within the shamanic traditions that shaped Mongol life before and alongside later Buddhist influence. Genghis Khan's death came at a dangerous moment. His empire had to survive without its founder, and succession needed careful handling. His chosen heir was Ögedei, but there was still the delicate business of holding together a ruling family full of ambitious sons, grandsons, generals, and tribal allies. A public tomb could have become a rallying point, a target, or a prize. So the burial of Genghis Khan was wrapped in secrecy. Whether this was his own instruction, a decision by his family, or a tradition later amplified into legend, the result was the same. The man who had spent his life making himself impossible to ignore was hidden after death with astonishing success. The first part of the mystery begins not with treasure or tunnels, but with silence. The most persistent tradition is that Genghis Khan wanted to be buried in an unmarked grave. No monument, no inscription, no convenient bronze plaque for future tourists wearing sensible shoes. This idea fits with what we know of Mongol elite burial customs, where secrecy and landscape mattered more than public display. A ruler's grave was not necessarily meant to be seen. It was meant to be protected. The burial party is said to have carried his body towards his homeland in Mongolia, probably towards the Khenti Mountains. This region, especially the area around Burkhan Khaldun, has long been connected with Genghis Khan's life and death. Burkhan Khaldun was not just a mountain. It was a sacred place, associated with his rise, his spiritual world, and the origins of Mongol power. The secrecy surrounding the burial has produced some grim traditions. One story claims that anyone who encountered the funeral procession was killed, so they could not reveal the route. Another says that the people who prepared the tomb were killed, and those who killed them were also killed, until nobody remained who knew the location. This is the kind of story that sounds like medieval human resources having a very bad century. Yet these tales should be treated carefully. They may not come from reliable contemporary evidence. They are part of the mythology that grew around Genghis Khan after his death, and they reflect the scale of awe and fear attached to him. Still, even if the details are exaggerated, they preserve a central idea. His burial was deliberately concealed. One of the most important concepts linked to the mystery is the Ich Korig, often translated as the Great Taboo. This was a restricted sacred zone in northeastern Mongolia, traditionally associated with the Mongol royal family. It was said to have been guarded for generations, with entry forbidden to outsiders. If Genghis Khan was buried within such a protected landscape, the secrecy was not simply a one-day operation. It became a cultural boundary. This is where the story moves from burial into legend. A hidden grave is one thing. A hidden grave guarded by taboo, sacred geography, and centuries of oral tradition is quite another. By the time later travelers and chroniclers wrote about Genghis Khan, the tomb had already disappeared from public knowledge. The grave was no longer just a place. It had become an absence powerful enough to shape imagination. Once a tomb vanishes, stories rush in to fill the gap. The tomb of Genghis Khan has attracted some of the most dramatic burial legends in world history, partly because the man himself was already larger than life. A modest explanation, such as, "They buried him quietly in a remote valley," never stood a chance once storytellers got involved. One famous legend says that horses were driven repeatedly over the grave to flatten the earth and erase any sign of disturbance. Another claims that a river was diverted over the burial site, hiding it beneath flowing water. This image is especially powerful because it appears in other burial legends across world history. Apparently, if you are a great ruler and want privacy after death, someone will eventually suggest amateur hydrological engineering. A different story says that trees were planted over the grave, allowing the landscape to swallow the site slowly. Another tradition involves a young camel being buried with Genghis Khan. The idea was that the mother camel could later be brought to the area and would weep at the place where her calf lay, revealing the hidden tomb to the royal family if needed. It is haunting, strange, and exactly the kind of detail that makes legends difficult to forget. These stories may not tell us where the tomb is, but they tell us something important about how people understood Genghis Khan. He was seen as someone whose death required extraordinary measures. His grave was imagined as too powerful, too dangerous, or too sacred to be left vulnerable. The burial site had to be protected not only from enemies, but from memory itself. The legends also reveal a tension between concealment and continuity. On one hand, nobody was supposed to know where the tomb was. On the other hand, some traditions suggest the royal family had ways of remembering or rediscovering it. That raises a fascinating possibility. Perhaps the location was never truly lost at first. Perhaps it was known within a restricted circle, then gradually faded from living memory as dynasties changed, empires fragmented, and political worlds moved on. By the late medieval period, even outside observers were struck by the uncertainty. The mystery had already hardened into tradition. Genghis Khan's grave had become both everywhere and nowhere, somewhere in the mountains, somewhere under a river, somewhere beneath trampled earth, somewhere in a forbidden zone. To move closer to the truth, historians have to step away from the wilder tales and look at the clues left in chronicles, landscapes, and cultural memory. The search for Genghis Khan's tomb begins with a frustrating problem. The most important early Mongol source, The Secret History of the Mongols, records his death, but gives no clear burial location. For historians, this is the equivalent of a detective novel ending with, "and then something happened somewhere." It is invaluable as a text, but on this particular question, it leaves a large and deliberate silence. Later sources offer hints, though not always reliable ones. Some Chinese and Persian accounts refer to Mongol royal burials in ancestral lands, but they do not identify the exact grave of Genghis Khan. Marco Polo, writing later in the 13th century, described traditions of Mongol rulers being carried to a particular mountain region for burial, no matter where they died. His account is interesting, but it mixes observation, hearsay, and the storytelling habits of a man who was never shy about a dramatic detail. The strongest geographic clue remains Burkhan Khaldun and the wider Khenti region. This area is deeply associated with Genghis Khan's early life, spiritual identity, and imperial origin story. According to tradition, he sought protection there in moments of danger, and later honoured the mountain as sacred. If he wished to be buried close to the land that had shaped him, this region makes sense. Burkhan Khaldun is not merely a candidate because treasure hunters like mountains. It matters because sacred landscapes were central to Mongol identity. The mountain was connected to Tengri, the eternal blue sky, and to the spiritual world of the steppe. A burial near such a place would not need marble walls or a gold roof. The mountain itself would be the monument. There is also the question of the Ordos region in modern Inner Mongolia, where a Genghis Khan mausoleum exists today. This site is important culturally, but it is not generally regarded as his actual burial place. It functions more as a memorial and ritual center than as a confirmed tomb. That distinction is important because the existence of a mausoleum can easily mislead people into thinking the mystery has been solved. It has not. The clues, therefore, point less to a single X on a map and more to a zone of possibility. The Khenti Mountains, Burkhan Khaldun, the Great Taboo, and Mongol royal tradition all form a pattern. They suggest that the tomb, if it survives, may lie somewhere in a sacred landscape where archaeology, memory, and national identity are tightly bound together. That is why modern searches have been so complicated. This is not just a missing grave, it is a living cultural question. Modern attempts to locate the tomb of Genghis Khan have brought satellites, drones, radar, archaeology, and crowdsourcing into a mystery that began with horses, mountains, and whispered tradition. On paper, this sounds promising. If modern technology can map buried cities, scan deserts, and find shipwrecks, surely it can locate one famous grave. History naturally responds by putting its feet up and refusing to cooperate. The problem is not simply technical. Mongolia's landscape is vast, remote, and difficult. The likely search areas include mountainous terrain, forest, river valleys, and sacred sites where digging is restricted or culturally inappropriate. Even when satellite images reveal unusual shapes or possible human-made features, those clues still need careful investigation on the ground. A suspicious mound from space can turn out to be geology having a laugh. Several projects have tried to approach the search with minimal disturbance. Satellite imagery has been used to identify possible archaeological features. Some researchers have turned to non-invasive methods, including aerial survey and ground-penetrating radar. Crowdsourced projects have invited members of the public to examine satellite images for anomalies. It is a strangely modern twist. Thousands of people looking for a medieval emperor's tomb from laptops, probably while also checking whether the kettle has boiled. Yet the cultural barriers remain significant. Many Mongolians do not necessarily want the tomb found, especially if discovery would lead to excavation. For some, the continued hiddenness of the grave is part of its meaning. Disturbing it would not be a triumph but a violation. This view is easy to understand when we remember that Genghis Khan is not merely a historical figure in Mongolia. He is tied to national identity, state formation, ancestry, and sacred landscape. The search has also attracted treasure-hunting fantasies, which complicate matters further. Popular imagination tends to picture gold, weapons, jewels, and imperial loot. In reality, the value of the tomb would be historical and cultural before anything else. It might reveal burial customs, elite Mongol material culture, and the relationship between power and spirituality in the early empire. But the idea of treasure still clings to the mystery like an over-enthusiastic souvenir seller. Modern archaeology, therefore, faces a difficult balance. It can ask where the tomb might be, but it must also ask whether finding it is the right goal. The next stage of the mystery is not only about evidence. It is about respect, restraint, and the possibility that some secrets survive because people choose not to break them open. The tomb of Genghis Khan remains undiscovered because several forces protect it at once. Geography protects it, tradition protects it, politics protects it, cultural reverence protects it, even uncertainty protects it, because the wider the field of possibility becomes, the harder it is to justify disturbing any one place. There may also be a simpler explanation. The tomb might not be grand in the way outsiders expect. If researchers are searching for a huge underground chamber packed with imperial splendor, they may be imagining the wrong kind of burial. Genghis Khan's grave could be subtle, deliberately plain, or hidden within a broader burial landscape. It might not announce itself as the resting place of a world conqueror. It might look, from the surface, like almost nothing at all. Time has done the rest. 8 centuries of weather, vegetation, erosion, political upheaval, and changing memory can hide almost anything. Empires rose after Genghis Khan, including the Yuan dynasty in China, and then fell. Mongolia itself passed through periods of fragmentation, Qing rule, revolution, socialism, and modern independence. Across those centuries, oral traditions may have shifted, restricted knowledge may have vanished, and sacred boundaries may have preserved places without preserving exact coordinates. The mystery also survives because it carries symbolic power. A discovered tomb becomes an archaeological site, subject to reports, debates, visitor management, and possibly queues. An undiscovered tomb remains something larger. It belongs to landscape, memory, and imagination. It allows Genghis Khan to remain, in death, partly beyond possession. That does not mean the search is pointless. The hunt for the tomb has encouraged interest in Mongolian history, landscape archaeology, and the relationship between heritage and national identity. It has also forced researchers to think carefully about ethics. The best modern approaches are not the ones that charge in with shovels. They are the ones who listen first, map carefully, and recognize that not every historical question should be answered by digging a hole. In the end, the mystery of the tomb of Genghis Khan is powerful because it reverses the usual story of conquest. In life, he crossed boundaries, broke kingdoms, and forced much of Eurasia to reckon with him. In death, he created a boundary of his own. The world can study him, argue over him, admire him, fear him, and condemn him, but it still cannot stand beside his grave with certainty. Perhaps that is exactly why the story endures. The man who changed the map of the world left behind one final empty space on it. Somewhere in Mongolia, perhaps beneath forest, mountain shadow, or sacred silence, the tomb may still lie hidden. And for now, Genghis Khan remains undefeated in one last campaign, keeping people out. That brings us to the end of this episode of Compact Mysteries, part of the Compact Histories Network. If you enjoyed it, please follow or subscribe wherever you're listening so you don't miss any future episodes, and consider leaving a rating or review, as it really helps new listeners find the show. You can find more episodes at compactmysteries.com, where you can also explore our other podcasts covering biographies, history, disasters, warfare, and true crime. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Pinterest. Finally, please consider supporting the show directly by buying us a coffee. Head on over to compacthistories.com/mysteriescoffee to see how. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.